The Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Empire stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian floors, its ceiling lost in artificial clouds that sparkled with holographic stars. Representatives from 47 different species sat in tiered galleries, their various breathing apparatus and environmental suits creating a symphony of mechanical hums and chemical filters. At the center of this vast space stood the Council of Dominion, 12 beings who controlled the fate of 1,000 worlds. Admiral Zex Thor of the Krillian Navy adjusted his ceremonial armor as he watched the human delegation enter through the massive doors. The humans walked with an odd confidence that made his scales ripple with unease. They wore simple black uniforms without any of the elaborate decorations or technological displays that other species use to show their power and status. Their leader, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, carried nothing but a simple datapad. "Behold the representatives of Earth," announced Chancellor Mordoon, his voice echoing through translation matrices in 47 languages. "You stand before the Council of Dominion to answer for your species' recent actions in the Outer Rim territories." The human woman stepped forward without any of the traditional bowing or prostration expected in the Great Assembly. Ambassador Sarah Chen looked up at the towering figures of the Council with calm brown eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the ornate chamber. "Honored Council," she began, her voice carrying clearly without amplification. "I am Ambassador Chen of the United Earth Federation. I come not to answer for our actions, but to address the crimes committed against my people." A collective gasp rose from the galleries. Several species began chattering in their native languages, creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones. Admiral Zex Thor's hand instinctively moved to his plasma weapon. No one had ever accused the Galactic Empire of crimes in this sacred hall. Chancellor Mordoon's massive form leaned forward, his 4 arms spreading wide in a gesture of dominance. "You dare speak of crimes? Your species has violated 17 trade agreements, refused to pay tribute to 3 sector governors, and worst of all, you have harbored known rebels and pirates in your system." Ambassador Chen reached into her uniform and withdrew a small recording device. The Council's security forces tensed, but she moved slowly and deliberately. "Before we discuss trade agreements and tribute, let me show you something that happened 6 months ago in the asteroid mining facility of Kepler 442b. The holographic projectors in the center of the hall activated, displaying a 3-dimensional image of a mining station. The structure was clearly human in design, with clean geometric lines and efficient use of space. Hundreds of humans could be seen working the asteroid extraction equipment, their movements coordinated and purposeful. "This was Mining Station Omega," Chen continued, her voice steady despite the horrific images beginning to play. 347 human civilians worked there, extracting rare minerals that we sold openly in galactic markets. We followed all Empire regulations, paid all fees, and operated under valid mining permits issued by your own colonial administration. The hologram showed Imperial warships approaching the station. The massive vessels bore the crimson and gold insignia of the 3rd Battle Fleet, their weapons already charged and targeting systems active. Sector Governor Veltar, a being that resembled a crystalline spider the size of a shuttlecraft, spoke from his position on the Council. "That facility was operating illegally. Our surveys showed mineral extraction beyond permitted levels." "Your surveys were wrong," Ambassador Chen replied, producing another device. "Here are the actual extraction records, transmitted daily to your colonial office, as required by law. Every gram of material was documented and reported." The recording continued, showing Imperial Marines boarding the station. The humans offered no resistance, believing this to be a routine inspection. Chen's voice narrated the events as they unfolded. "Your Marines gave the civilians 30 minutes to evacuate, 30 minutes to abandon their homes, their work, everything they had built over 5 years of operation. When the evacuation ships launched, your fleet opened fire. The hologram exploded in brilliant light as Imperial weapons destroyed the fleeing civilian transports. The gathered representatives watched in stunned silence as ship after ship was reduced to glowing debris. 347 human civilians died in the span of 10 minutes. This was not law enforcement, Chen said, her voice now carrying an edge of steel that made several council members shift uncomfortably. Cold-blooded murder of innocent people whose only crime was being human in territory you wanted to control. Admiral Zexthor stood up abruptly, his ceremonial sword clanging against his armor. Those were legitimate military actions against suspected terrorist operations. Your species has been harboring rebels throughout the Outer Rim. Show me the evidence, Chen challenged, taking another step toward the council platform. Show me one piece of proof that mining station Omega housed rebels or terrorists. Show me the intelligence reports, the surveillance data, anything that justified the slaughter of 300 innocent people. The silence stretched across the great assembly like a physical presence. Security drones hummed overhead. Their sensors locked onto the human delegation. Several representatives in the galleries began whispering among themselves, their various species' expressions of concern creating a subdued chorus of worry. Chancellor Mordun's voice boomed through the hall, carrying undertones of threat. The security of the Empire requires decisive action against all potential threats. We do not negotiate with species that harbor enemies of galactic peace. Ambassador Chen activated another recording. This time, the hologram showed human merchant vessels being stopped at Imperial checkpoints. The ships were clearly marked with Earth Federation identifiers and carried standard cargo manifests. Potential threats, she repeated, her voice dripping with controlled anger. Is that what you called the merchant ship, New Horizon, when your forces boarded it last month? The crew was transporting medical supplies to the colony of New Geneva. They had full documentation, proper permits, and were following established trade routes. The hologram showed Imperial troops forcing the human crew to their knees. The captain, a gray-haired man who couldn't have been threatening to anyone, tried to explain their mission. An Imperial officer struck him down with an energy weapon. Captain Rodriguez and his crew of 12 were executed for suspicious cargo movement. Chen continued. The medical supplies they carried could have saved thousands of lives on New Geneva. Instead, they were confiscated and sold on the black market by your own officials. More recordings followed. Human colonies burned to the ground, civilian transports destroyed without warning, trade vessels impounded, and their crews imprisoned without trial. Each incident was documented with cold precision, showing the systematic persecution of humanity throughout Imperial space. The Council of Dominion sat in uncomfortable silence as the evidence mounted. What had been presented as law enforcement actions against a rebellious species was revealed as something far more sinister. The pattern was clear and undeniable. You want to know about harboring rebels? Ambassador Chen asked, her voice now rising to fill the vast chamber. Every human survivor of your law enforcement actions becomes a rebel when they watch their families murdered by Imperial forces. Every colonist whose home is burned becomes an enemy when you steal their world. You created the very resistance you claim to be fighting against. Sector Governor Veltar's crystalline form shimmered with agitation. Your species refuses to acknowledge Imperial authority. You will not bow to legitimate governance. Legitimate governance doesn't murder civilians, Chen shot back. Legitimate governance doesn't steal colonies that were legally purchased and developed. Legitimate governance doesn't execute merchant crews for carrying medicine to sick children. She activated one final recording. This one showed a human colony world. Green and beautiful, with cities that sparkled in the light of twin suns. Children played in parks, while their parents worked in gleaming towers that reached toward the sky. New harmony, she said softly. Population: 2 million humans. Established 40 years ago. After purchasing the development rights from the Empire itself, we paid 17 billion credits for that world, and spent another 30 billion developing it into a paradise. The recording shifted to show Imperial dreadnoughts in orbit around the planet. Bombardment began without warning, turning cities into craters and forests into burning wastelands. The orbital strikes continued for 6 hours until nothing remained but ash and radioactive glass. Your Ninth Fleet sterilized New Harmony 3 weeks ago, Chen continued, her voice breaking slightly for the first time. 2 million innocent people died because you decided humans were unsuitable for colonial development in that sector. The children who played in those parks, the families who built those cities, the elderly who had spent their whole lives creating something beautiful. All gone because of your legitimate governance. The Great Assembly had fallen completely silent. Even the mechanical sounds of the various life support systems seemed muted. Representatives from dozens of species stared at the images of destruction with expressions of horror and disbelief. Admiral Zex Thor tried to regain control of the situation. The Empire maintains order throughout the galaxy. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good of all species. The greater good? Ambassador Chen turned to face him directly, her eyes blazing with fury that made the massive warrior take a step backward. You destroyed an entire world because you wanted the mineral rights. The greater good was your profit margin. She walked closer to the council platform, each step echoing in the vast space. But here's what you don't understand about humans. When you murder our families, we don't just mourn, we remember. When you steal our worlds, we don't just rebuild, we prepare. When you slaughter our innocent, we don't just forgive, we plan. Chancellor Mordoon leaned forward menacingly. Are you threatening the Galactic Empire, human? Ambassador Chen smiled, and there was something in that expression that made every being in the Great Assembly suddenly aware of how quiet the human delegation had been throughout the proceedings. They hadn't spoken, hadn't moved, hadn't even seemed to breathe. They stood like statues, watching everything with those calm human eyes that missed nothing. Threatening? Chen repeated. No, Chancellor. I'm delivering a message. She pressed a final control on her datapad, and new images appeared in the holographic display. These weren't recordings of past atrocities. These were real-time feeds from across the galaxy, transmitted through quantum relay networks that shouldn't have been accessible to any unauthorized species. The images showed Imperial fleets throughout the galaxy, massive dreadnoughts that had never been defeated in battle, space stations that controlled entire sectors, command centers that coordinated the movement of trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. Every single one was dead in space. Their lights were out, their weapons offline, their crews either unconscious or trapped in emergency shelters. Not destroyed, simply neutralized, rendered as helpless as newborns. This is happening right now, Ambassador Chen announced to the stunned assembly. Every Imperial military asset in the galaxy has been disabled. Your communication networks are down. Your command structure is cut off. Your mighty fleets are floating helplessly in space. The council members began shouting at once, demanding explanations, calling for their security forces, trying to contact their homeworlds. But their communication systems had gone dark. The Great Assembly was isolated, cut off from the rest of the empire they ruled. How? Chancellor Mordoon managed to ask, his forearms trembling with rage and fear. Ambassador Chen's smile grew wider. You really should have asked what humans did during the years you were busy murdering our people. You should have wondered why a species with our technological capabilities was so easily conquered. You should have questioned why we always seemed to have just a little less than what you expected. She gestured to her silent companions, who finally moved for the first time since entering the hall. They reached into their simple black uniforms and withdrew devices that looked like nothing more than personal communicators. While you were busy committing genocide, Chen continued, human engineers were studying your technology. While your fleets were burning our colonies, our programmers were writing viruses designed specifically for Imperial systems. While you were congratulating yourselves on your superiority, we were placing these little devices on every Imperial vessel, station, and facility we could access. The devices in her companion's hands pulsed with a soft blue light. Throughout the galaxy, the paralyzed Imperial forces would be seeing that same blue light on terminals they had never noticed, hidden in routine maintenance equipment and standard communication relays. Every human who died serving on your ships was a spy, Chen revealed. Every human technician who repaired your equipment left us a gift. Every human merchant who traded with your worlds placed our little surprises exactly where we needed them. The magnitude of the operation began to dawn on the Council. For decades, humans had been the galaxy's servants, working the jobs that other species considered beneath them. They had repaired Imperial ships, maintained Imperial stations, and serviced Imperial equipment throughout the galaxy. And every single one had been part of a massive intelligence network. "You violated our world," Ambassador Chen said, her voice now carrying the authority of a species that had just demonstrated its true power. "You murdered our innocent. You stole our colonies and destroyed our cities. You treated us like vermin, to be exterminated whenever convenient." She looked up at each council member in turn, meeting their various optical organs with unwavering determination. "Now you get to learn what humans are really capable of when we stop pretending to be helpless." The emergency klaxons that should have been blaring throughout the Great Assembly remained silent. Emergency communication channels that should have connected the Council to their military commanders showed only static. For the first time in over 1,000 years, the rulers of the Galactic Empire found themselves completely cut off from their power base. Chancellor Mordoon's massive form trembled as he attempted to access his personal command interfaces. Nothing responded. The holographic displays that normally showed the real-time status of Imperial forces across the galaxy remained blank. His forearms moved frantically across control surfaces that no longer recognized his authority. "This is impossible," Admiral Zex Thor snarled, his scaled hide shifting to the deep red color his species displayed during extreme stress. "No force in the galaxy has the power to neutralize our entire fleet simultaneously. Our ships are scattered across millions of light years." Ambassador Chen walked slowly around the council platform, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber like a countdown timer. The human delegation followed her, their movements coordinated with military precision despite their civilian appearance. Each carried those innocuous-looking devices that had somehow brought the galaxy's greatest empire to its knees. "You're thinking in terms of force," Chen replied calmly. "Typical Imperial thinking. Apply enough violence, and any problem can be solved. But humans learned long ago that the most devastating weapons aren't always the most obvious ones." She gestured to the dead holographic displays around the chamber. "What you're experiencing isn't a military attack. It's a system shutdown. Every piece of Imperial technology contains components manufactured on human worlds or serviced by human technicians. We've had decades to study your systems, understand their weaknesses, and plan accordingly." Sector Governor Veltar's crystalline form chimed with harmonic distress frequencies. "Our security protocols are unbreakable. Multiple redundant systems protect all critical infrastructure. Your security protocols were designed by committee," Chen responded with a slight smile. 47 different species, each insisting on their own authentication methods, their own encryption standards, their own command hierarchies. The result is a beautiful mess of incompatible systems held together by universal interface protocols." She activated her data pad, and new images appeared in the holographic display. These showed the internal workings of Imperial computer systems, layer upon layer of security measures that seemed impenetrable. "Humans excel at finding patterns," Chen continued. "While your species were busy arguing about whose security system was superior, human programmers were mapping every connection, every data pathway, every backup protocol. We identified 17,000 separate entry points into your so-called secure networks." The images zoomed in on specific code segments, showing how human-written subroutines had been quietly integrated into Imperial systems. What looked like routine maintenance protocols were actually sophisticated infiltration programs, designed to activate simultaneously across the galaxy. "The beautiful thing about universal interfaces," Chen explained, "is that once you understand them, you can use them universally. Every Imperial ship, station, and facility uses the same basic communication protocols. We simply gave them all the same instruction at the same time. Shut down." Chancellor Mordoon struggled to his feet, his massive frame swaying with rage. "Even if you've disabled our military forces temporarily, You cannot hold the entire galaxy hostage. Our worlds have billions of inhabitants, civilian populations that depend on Imperial infrastructure. Which is exactly why we're not holding anyone hostage, Chen replied. Medical facilities have full power. Transportation systems for essential services are running smoothly. She paused, letting the implications sink in. We've only disabled military assets and the governmental systems that supported your genocidal policies. Your people are safe, fed, and healthy. They're just no longer under the boot of an empire that murders entire species for profit. The representatives in the galleries began murmuring among themselves. Many species had their own grievances against the empire, complaints that had been suppressed by imperial military might. For the first time in centuries, they dared to voice their concerns openly. Representative Kythara of the Floating Cities spoke in her species' musical tones. The Empire has forced us to strip mine our ocean floors, destroying ecosystems that took millions of years to develop. When we protested, your fleets blockaded our world until we submitted. Ambassador Chen nodded acknowledgement. The floating cities were classified as minimal resistance priority in our intelligence files. We made sure your environmental control systems were protected during the shutdown. Other voices joined the growing chorus of grievances. The hive builders complained about forced relocation from their ancestral worlds. The Wanderer fleet spoke of being denied passage through space they had traveled for generations. The Crystal Singers described how imperial mining operations had shattered the resonant caves their entire culture depended upon. Each species had suffered under imperial rule, but none had possessed the means to resist. The Empire's military superiority had been absolute, its retaliation swift and merciless. Now, with that military power neutralized, suppressed anger began to surface throughout the Great Assembly. Admiral Zex Thor drew his ceremonial sword, the plasma blade crackling to life with brilliant energy. Whatever trick you've employed, it cannot last forever. When our forces come back online, humanity will face complete extinction. Will they come back online? Chen asked mildly. That depends entirely on your next decisions. She activated another function on her datapad. The holographic display now showed detailed schematics of Imperial technology. From the smallest communication relay to the most massive dreadnought. Every system had been tagged with human modifications, subtle alterations that were invisible to normal diagnostics. We didn't just shut down your systems, Chen revealed. We improved them. Every Imperial ship now has enhanced life support efficiency, better waste recycling, improved radiation shielding, and more reliable gravity generators. Your space stations have upgraded power distribution networks and enhanced structural integrity. The council members stared at the technical readouts in confusion. Why would an enemy force improve their victim's technology? You see, Chen continued, humans have this peculiar trait that other species find difficult to understand. When we fix something, we make it better than it was before. Even when we're angry, even when we're planning revenge, we can't seem to help ourselves from improving whatever we touch. She walked closer to Admiral Zex Thor, seemingly unconcerned by his drawn weapon. Every modification we made to your systems includes what we call a conscience subroutine. Your ships will still fly. Your weapons will still fire. Your stations will still function, but they will no longer target civilian populations. They will no longer follow orders to commit genocide. They will no longer participate in the murder of innocents. The Admiral's sword wavered as he processed the implications. You've turned our own technology against us. We've given your technology a moral foundation, Chen corrected. Something the Empire apparently couldn't manage on its own. Your fleets can still defend Imperial worlds from genuine threats. They can still maintain order and protect trade routes. They just can't be used to slaughter helpless populations anymore. Chancellor Mordoon's voice dropped to a menacing growl. And what exactly do you want in exchange for returning control of our systems? Ambassador Chen smiled again, and this time there was genuine warmth in the expression. This isn't a negotiation or a hostage situation. This is a gift. She gestured to her companions, who began distributing small devices to the confused representatives throughout the galleries. These are communication interfaces that will allow direct contact with your home worlds. For the first time in Imperial history, planetary representatives can communicate directly with their populations without interference from the central government. 2-3. The magnitude of what she was offering began to sink in. For 1,000 years, the Empire had maintained control through strict information management. Planetary representatives knew only what the central government chose to tell them about conditions on other worlds. Citizens knew only what local imperial administrators permitted them to know. "We're giving you democracy," Chen announced. "Real democracy, where populations can actually communicate with their representatives and make informed decisions about their futures. Your people will finally be able to choose whether they want to remain part of the Empire, form their own federations, or pursue complete independence." Panic spread through the council ranks as they realized the implications. If planetary populations could communicate freely, if they could coordinate resistance, if they could share information about imperial atrocities, the careful structure of control that had maintained the Empire for centuries would collapse within days. "You're destroying everything we've built," Sector Governor Veltar accused, his crystalline form darkening with anger. "We're revealing what you built," Chen corrected. "An empire founded on fear, maintained by violence, and sustained by keeping your own citizens ignorant of your crimes. When people have access to the truth, they tend to make better choices." She activated one final program on her datapad. Throughout the galaxy, on every Imperial world, communication networks suddenly expanded beyond anything their inhabitants had ever experienced. Planetary databases opened to public access. Historical records that had been classified for centuries became available to any citizen who wanted to read them. Most importantly, the testimony that Ambassador Chen had just presented to the Great Assembly was simultaneously broadcast to every world in the Empire. Billions of beings were watching the recordings of imperial atrocities, learning for the first time about the systematic murder of entire species, witnessing the evidence of corruption and brutality that had been hidden from them. "Your own people are seeing this," Chen told the council. "They're learning what their government has been doing in their name. They're discovering that the dangerous rebels and terrorist species you've been fighting were actually innocent civilians defending their homes and families." The representatives in the galleries were receiving messages from their home worlds, transmitted through the newly opened communication channels. The reactions were immediate and powerful. Species after species began reporting massive civilian protests, demands for governmental reform, and calls for the immediate cessation of military actions against other worlds. "You've started a revolution," Chancellor Mordoon accused, his forearms clenched into massive fists. "We've started a conversation," Chen replied. "For the first time in 1,000 years, the people of the galaxy can talk to each other honestly. They can share their experiences, learn from their differences, and make informed decisions about their future relationships." Admiral Zex Thor finally lowered his weapon, the plasma blade flickering out as the reality of the situation became clear. "What happens to the Empire? What happens to order and stability? That's not up to humans to decide," Chen answered. "That's up to every species in the galaxy. Maybe they'll choose to maintain some form of central coordination. Maybe they'll form smaller federations based on common interests. Maybe some worlds will choose complete independence." She looked around the Great Assembly, meeting the eyes of representatives who were still struggling to understand how completely their world had changed in the space of a few hours. "The only thing we've taken away is your ability to force that choice," she continued. "From now on, if the Empire continues to exist, it will be because people genuinely want it to exist. If worlds choose to remain under imperial governance, it will be because they believe that government serves their interests." The fundamental balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently. Military might no longer guarantee political control. Information could no longer be restricted to maintain authority. The age of empire maintained by force had ended, replaced by an uncertain but hopeful era of genuine self-determination. Ambassador Chen gathered her companions and began walking toward the exit of the Great Assembly. Their mission was complete, but the real work was just beginning. Across the galaxy, billions of beings were starting conversations that would shape the future of galactic civilization. "Where are you going?" Chancellor Mordun called after her. Chen paused at the massive doors and looked back at the council that no longer controlled anything beyond their immediate chambers. "Home," she said simply. For the first time in decades, humans can finally go home without fear of being murdered for existing. The Great Assembly fell silent as the human delegation departed, leaving behind a galaxy that would never be the same again. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Chen's revelation in the Great Assembly, and the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. From the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity Station, Director Sarah Chen watched as ships from dozens of species approached the massive diplomatic complex. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by 7 different civilizations working together for the first time in recorded galactic history. The communication revolution had exceeded even human expectations. Within days of the network's opening, species that had been isolated for centuries discovered they shared similar cultures, technologies, and values. The crystalline harmonic builders found that their architectural principles meshed perfectly with the organic designs of the plant weavers. The nomadic sky dancers learned that the deep space wanderer fleets followed similar stellar currents and could benefit from shared navigation data. Director Chen announced her assistant, a young aquatic former named Splash of Sunlight on Deep Waters. "The former Imperial Council has requested another meeting. They're becoming increasingly desperate." Chen turned from the viewport where she had been watching a hive builder construction crew work alongside human engineers to expand the station's docking facilities. The cooperation between species that had never been allowed to interact freely was producing innovations that nobody had anticipated. "Let them wait a little longer," she replied calmly. "The longer they sit in their empty palace, the more they'll understand what it feels like to be powerless." The former Great Assembly had become a ghost town. Most of the species' representatives had returned to their home worlds to participate in the democratic revolutions that were transforming planetary governments throughout the galaxy. The Council of Dominion still met daily, but they ruled nothing beyond the ceremonial halls where they had once commanded the fates of trillions. "Status report on the transition zones?" Chen asked as they walked through corridors that bustled with beings from across the galaxy. Here, a group of methane-breathing void swimmers worked with oxygen-using tree shapers to design atmospheric processors that could support both forms of life. There, human children played games with young crystal singers, their laughter creating harmonic resonances that made the alien children's parent forms glow with pleasure. "Remarkable progress," Splash of Sunlight replied, consulting a data tablet that displayed information in both human text and aquatic former color patterns. 17 former imperial sectors have formed cooperative federations. 23 individual worlds have declared independence and requested membership in the new Galactic Cooperation Network. Only 4 systems have expressed interest in maintaining traditional imperial governance. That last number didn't surprise Chen. Those 4 systems were the original imperial core worlds, populated primarily by the species that had created the empire and benefited most from its conquest of other civilizations. They faced a difficult future as isolated autocracies in a galaxy that was rapidly embracing democratic cooperation. "Any word from the human colony worlds?" Chen asked as they entered the main diplomatic center. The vast space was organized into dozens of meeting areas where representatives from different species could interact in environments suited to their particular needs. Atmospheric bubbles contained methane breathers, while gravity fields accommodated species that required different levels of planetary pull. New Geneva has finished rebuilding and is now hosting refugees from 7 different species, Splash of Sunlight reported. New harmony is being restored by a joint effort between humans and the stellar gardeners. They're using some kind of advanced terraforming technology to heal the radiation damage from the Imperial bombardment. The mention of new harmony brought a brief shadow across Chen's features. 2 million innocent humans had died there, but their sacrifice had not been in vain. The recordings of that atrocity had sparked the largest civilian uprising in galactic history, leading to the peaceful revolution that was still transforming dozens of worlds. They entered Chen's office, a modest space that looked out over the diplomatic center's main floor. Unlike the opulent chambers where imperial officials had once held court, this room was designed for work rather than intimidation. The walls displayed real-time feeds from cooperative projects throughout the galaxy, showing beings of different species working together in ways that had been impossible under imperial rule. "Director," her communication officer announced, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Sol Defense Fleet." Chen activated the holographic display, and the weathered features of Admiral Rebecca Martinez appeared in three-dimensional projection. The Admiral looked tired but satisfied, her uniform bearing the insignia of the new Earth Federation Navy. "Sarah," Martinez began, "I wanted to update you on the situation in the former Outer Rim territories. The last of the Imperial holdout fleets surrendered yesterday. Admiral Zexthor himself formally transferred command of the 3rd Battle Fleet to a coalition of species representatives. This was significant news. Zexthor had been one of the most dedicated Imperial officers, a true believer in the Empire's divine right to rule the galaxy. His surrender marked the effective end of organized Imperial military resistance. "What's his current status?" Chen asked. "Requesting asylum on Earth," Martinez replied with a slight smile. "Apparently, he's studied human history and finds our concepts of justice more appealing than what his own people are planning for former Imperial officers. Several species have some rather creative punishments in mind for the military commanders who destroyed their worlds." Chen nodded thoughtfully. The aftermath of the Empire's fall had not been entirely peaceful. While most species had embraced democratic reform, some had initially sought revenge against their former oppressors. It had taken considerable diplomatic effort to establish truth and reconciliation commissions instead of execution squads. "Grant the asylum request," she decided. "But make sure he understands he'll be expected to testify fully about Imperial war crimes. No amnesty without accountability." "Understood," Martinez confirmed. On a related note, the new Galactic Cooperation Network has formally invited Earth to host the first Interspecies Constitutional Convention. 234 different civilizations want to work together to create a framework for peaceful galactic governance. The magnitude of that invitation was staggering. For the first time in galactic history, hundreds of species were voluntarily choosing to cooperate, rather than being forced into submission by superior firepower. The convention would be the largest diplomatic gathering ever attempted, requiring new forms of translation technology and environmental accommodation. "Accept the invitation," Chen replied immediately. "But make it clear that Earth is hosting, not leading. This has to be a genuine collaboration, if it's going to work." After ending the transmission, Chen returned to the viewport to watch the continuing construction outside. A new section of the station was being added by a team of geometric builders, working with human architects. Their mathematical approach to space utilization, combined with human creativity, was producing structures that were both incredibly efficient and surprisingly beautiful. "Director," Splash of Sunlight announced, "the former Chancellor Mordun is here for that meeting he requested. Should I show him in?" Chen considered the request. Part of her wanted to let the former dictator wait indefinitely, to experience the powerlessness he had inflicted on so many others. But the future of galactic civilization depended on learning from the past, not simply repeating old patterns of hatred and revenge. "Send him in," she decided. The being who entered her office was a shadow of the imposing figure who had once ruled from the Great Assembly. Mordun's 4 arms hung limply at his sides, his massive frame seemed diminished, and his once commanding voice had been reduced to a humble whisper. "Director Chen," he began, struggling to meet her eyes, "I come to request mercy for my people." "Your people," Chen repeated, settling back in her chair. "You mean the citizens of your home world who trusted you to lead them wisely? Or do you mean the former Imperial officials who carried out genocide in their name?" "Both," Mordun replied honestly. "My world faces complete isolation. No species will trade with us, communicate with us, or acknowledge our existence. We are slowly dying as our technology fails, and our resources dwindle. Chen had expected this meeting. The core imperial worlds were facing the natural consequences of their actions, but those consequences were affecting innocent civilians who had never been told the truth about their government's crimes. "What exactly are you asking for?" she inquired. "A chance for redemption," Mordoon answered. "Allow us to join the Galactic Cooperation Network. Give us the opportunity to make amends for the crimes committed in our name." "That's not my decision to make," Chen replied. "The network is governed by consensus among all member species. If you want to join, you'll need to convince the species you oppressed that you deserve a second chance." Mordoon's massive form slumped with despair. "They will never forgive us. Too much blood has been spilled, too much suffering inflicted." Chen stood and walked to her window, looking out at the diverse beings working together in the construction bays. "You're probably right that forgiveness won't come easily, but humans have learned something about redemption over our long history. It's not about being forgiven. It's about earning the right to forgiveness through sustained good actions." She turned back to face the former chancellor. "Your people want to join the network? Then start acting like network members. Use your remaining technology to help others instead of trying to dominate them. Share your scientific knowledge freely instead of hoarding it for military advantage. Open your worlds to refugees and asylum seekers instead of maintaining closed borders." "But we need approval from the Network Council," Mordoon protested. "No," Chen corrected. "You need approval from your victims. Start by reaching out to the species you harmed most directly. Offer reparations to the survivors of New Harmony. Provide technological assistance to rebuild the worlds your fleets destroyed. Show through actions, not words, that your people have genuinely changed." Mordoon was silent for a long moment, processing the enormity of what she was suggesting. "That could take decades. Genocide took you centuries to perfect," Chen replied without sympathy. "Redemption should take at least as long to achieve properly." After the former chancellor left, Chen returned to reviewing reports from across the galaxy. The transformation was remarkable, but not uniform. Some regions had embraced democratic cooperation with enthusiasm, forming innovative new governments that balanced individual rights with collective needs. Others struggled with the transition, their populations unprepared for the sudden freedom to make their own choices. "Director," her communication officer announced. "Incoming transmission from the Wanderer Fleet Admiral." The hologram that appeared showed a being whose species Chen still found fascinating. The Wanderers were essentially living spacecraft. Their bodies evolved for life in the vacuum of space. Admiral current through Void's crystalline carapace reflected the starlight streaming through the viewports of his flagship. "Director Chen." The Admiral communicated through harmonic vibrations, translated into audible speech. "The Fleet Council has reached a decision regarding the human proposal for shared stellar cartography." Chen leaned forward with interest. The Wanderers possessed the most complete maps of the galaxy, accumulated over millions of years of constant travel through space. Their willingness to share that knowledge would revolutionize galactic navigation and exploration. "We accept your proposal," Current through Void announced, "but with conditions. The cartographic data must be freely available to all species, not controlled by any single government or organization. And we request human assistance in establishing permanent way stations for fleet maintenance." "Agreed," Chen replied immediately. The Wanderers' conditions were perfectly reasonable and aligned with the network's principles of open cooperation. "I'll have our best engineers start working on way station designs that can accommodate your unique requirements. There is one more thing," the Admiral continued, his harmonic tones shifting to frequencies that indicated significant emotion. "The Fleet Elders wish to thank humanity for what you have done. For the first time in our recorded history, we can travel through space without fear of being attacked by territorial species. The trade routes are open, the communication channels are clear, and the star paths are safe." The gratitude in those alien harmonics was deeply moving. The Wanderer fleet had suffered for generations under imperial policies that restricted their movement and criminalized their nomadic lifestyle. Now, they were free to resume their ancient migrations across the galaxy. The thanks belong to all species working together, Chen replied. Humanity just provided the catalyst. The real work of building a better galaxy is being done by beings like yourself. After ending the transmission, Chen walked through the station's main corridors, observing the continued miracle of interspecies cooperation. In one section, human doctors worked with crystal singer healers to develop new medical techniques that combined technological precision with harmonic therapy. In another, aquatic former engineers collaborated with tree shaper biologists to design living ships that could heal themselves and adapt to different space environments. The station's central plaza had become a gathering place where beings from across the galaxy could meet informally. Children of dozens of species played together while their parents conducted business or simply enjoyed conversation with beings they would never have been allowed to meet under Imperial rule. A group of young humans sat in a circle with crystal singer juveniles, learning to create harmonic patterns that made beautiful light displays in the crystalline beings' bodies. Nearby, tree shaper saplings were teaching human children how to encourage plant growth through bioelectromagnetic fields. Remarkable, commented a familiar voice behind her. Chen turned to find Dr. Marcus Webb, one of the human scientists who had developed the conscience subroutines that had made the galactic transformation possible. His weathered face showed the strain of the past months, but also deep satisfaction at seeing their work's positive results. Marcus, she greeted him warmly. How are the final system integrations proceeding? Better than we dared hope, he replied, gesturing to a datapad filled with technical readouts. The conscience subroutines have been successfully integrated into 97% of former Imperial technology. The remaining 3% consists of systems so old or so modified that they can't support the upgrades. This was crucial information. The conscience subroutines were what prevented the galaxy from descending back into the chaos of unrestricted warfare. As long as most military technology refused to target civilians or commit war crimes, conflicts could be resolved through negotiation rather than genocide. Any resistance to the integration? Chen asked. Some, Webb admitted. A few military commanders have tried to remove or circumvent the subroutines, but the programming is self-repairing and deeply embedded. The only way to remove it completely would be to rebuild the technology from scratch, which would take decades and require resources that most military organizations no longer possess. They walked together toward the station's research section, where scientists from dozens of species were working on collaborative projects that would have been impossible under Imperial rule. The diversity of approaches was producing breakthroughs at an unprecedented rate. Dr. Webb called, a melodious voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. They turned to see Harmony of Growing Things, one of the plant weaver researchers whose species communicated through pheromone releases and bioelectrical fields. The consciousness transfer experiments are showing promising results, the plant weaver reported through a translation device that converted chemical signals into audible speech. We may be able to preserve the memories and experiences of dying beings by encoding them into living plant matrices. Webb's eyes widened with excitement. You mean actual immortality? Or, at least, preservation of consciousness beyond biological death? More than that, Harmony replied, their chlorophyll-based skin shifting to colors that indicated deep satisfaction. The plant matrices can be networked together, allowing shared consciousness experiences between different species. We could create truly collective intelligence while preserving individual identity. The implications were staggering. Such technology could eliminate much of the fear and misunderstanding that led to conflicts between species. If beings could literally share consciousness and experience life from another species' perspective, the basis for most prejudice and hatred would disappear. How long before practical applications? Chen asked. Years, possibly decades, Harmony admitted. But the theoretical foundation is solid. We're already seeing successful consciousness sharing between individual plant weavers and willing volunteers from other species. As they continued their tour, Chen reflected on how rapidly the galaxy had transformed. 6 months ago, the idea of voluntary consciousness sharing between different species would have been dismissed as impossible fantasy. Now it was being actively developed by researchers who trusted each other enough to literally share their minds. Director Chen, her assistant's voice came through the communication system. The Network Council is ready for the final vote on the Galactic Constitution. Chen hurried to the main assembly chamber, where representatives from 234 species had gathered to vote on the framework that would govern their future cooperation. Unlike the old imperial system, where a small council imposed their will on everyone else. This constitution had been developed through months of collaborative discussion and compromise. The chamber itself was a marvel of inclusive design. Each species had environmental zones suited to their particular needs, but all were connected through universal translation networks that allowed real-time communication in hundreds of languages and communication methods. Before we proceed to the final vote, announced Speaker Deep Current of Thought, a oceanic dweller whose species had been chosen to moderate the Constitutional Convention due to their reputation for careful deliberation. Are there any final concerns or amendments to address? The silence that followed was remarkable. After months of intense debate, every species had finally reached consensus on the fundamental principles that would guide galactic civilization. Voluntary cooperation, shared resources, protected rights for all sentient beings, and peaceful resolution of conflicts. Then we proceed to the vote. Deep Current continued. All in favor of adopting the Galactic Cooperation Constitution? 234 different signals of agreement filled the chamber. Light patterns from crystal singers, harmonic resonances from wanderers, pheromone releases from plant weavers, electromagnetic pulses from energy dancers, and dozens of other forms of communication all expressed unanimous approval. The Constitution is adopted, Deep Current announced. Their words translated into every language and communication method represented in the chamber. Chen felt tears streaming down her face as she watched beings from across the galaxy celebrate their historic achievement. For the first time in recorded history, hundreds of species had voluntarily chosen to work together as equals rather than being forced into submission by conquest. The celebration continued for hours, but eventually the representatives began returning to their home worlds to implement the democratic reforms that would bring their societies into alignment with the new galactic framework. As Unity Station gradually returned to its normal operations, Chen found herself alone on the observation deck where she had begun her day. The view outside showed ships departing in all directions, carrying the seeds of the new galactic civilization to every corner of known space. "No regrets?" asked a voice behind her. She turned to find Admiral Martinez, who had arrived on the station during the Constitutional Convention. "About what?" Chen replied with a smile. "About not conquering the galaxy ourselves when we had the chance," Martinez clarified. For a brief moment, humanity held absolute power over every other species. We could have established a human empire that would have lasted for millennia. Chen looked back out at the departing ships, each carrying beings who were free to choose their own destinies for the first time in their species' history. "Rebecca," she said softly, "we did conquer the galaxy. We conquered it with something more powerful than weapons or fear. We conquered it with the idea that beings can choose to work together instead of being forced to submit." She gestured to the vast expanse of space where ships from dozens of species traveled safely along routes protected by cooperative agreements rather than military threat. "Look at what we've built," Chen continued. "Not a human empire that would eventually collapse like all empires do, but a genuine civilization where everyone has a voice and everyone has value. This will last because it's based on choice rather than force." Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "The historians will probably call this the beginning of the Galactic Age." "Let them call it whatever they want," Chen replied. "I just call it home." Above them, the stars shone with the light of billions of worlds, where beings could now live in freedom, work in cooperation, and dream of futures limited only by their imagination and willingness to help others achieve their dreams as well. The galaxy had been shocked when the human envoy declared that their world had been violated. But the real shock had come when humanity chose to heal the galaxy rather than rule it. In the end, that choice had made all the difference.